first reactions to reading some of the high level details of this and hearing some of the things that are in this affidavit?
I mean, the first takeaway from reading this affidavit is that Mr. Simpson hasn't been entirely honest with the police and law enforcement. He seems to be pretty defensive. He's not keeping his story straight if all of these different people are right about what they heard exactly. So, right off the bat, you read conflicting statements from the defendant according to different law enforcement officers, and you think maybe he's got something to hide because it doesn't seem like he's being honest. That said, there's a lot of reasons people don't cooperate with the police. There's a lot of reasons all lawyers tend to advise their clients not to talk to the police because anything you say can be used against you in very unpredictable ways. And the more stressed out you are, the more you tend to make little errors that can be magnified into something bigger than they are. So while it does seem like he's not being honest with the cops, I really don't feel that the information in the warrant establishes anything close to guilt for a murder.
Say somebody with these facts comes to your office, you read the affidavit, and they're like, "All right, Joe, I want to sign up as one of your clients." What's your advice to them, just from a realistic standpoint of what they can expect going forward?
If somebody came to my office and told me this story as a prospective client, the first thing I would tell them is you need to stop talking to the police, and we need to reconstruct a detailed timeline of what happened and start doing our own investigation, because it's the only chance that that person would have of an objective investigation being done. It's clear that law enforcement have decided that he is their primary suspect, probably their only suspect in Mrs. Simpson's disappearance. And so all of the evidence for them is going to be viewed through that lens. This is a high-risk situation for Brad Simpson because law enforcement has made up their mind and they're willing to move forward on very thin circumstantial evidence. But I would also tell, someone like Brad Simpson that this is a case that's worth fighting if he believes that he's innocent. If he's saying he's innocent, there's nothing here that says he's guilty. It just says that he doesn't want to cooperate with the police, that he's got a bad marriage, and that at certain times he hasn't treated his wife as well as he should have. But it doesn't say that he killed her.
And without a body right now, do you think that the state has an uphill battle? And even if with the body, do you think that that changes things?
I mean, I think that the state does have an uphill battle. They don't appear to have a murder weapon. They don't appear to have a body. They have a very detailed timeline of Brad Simpson's movements, but it's not a timeline that allows for a very thorough concealment of a body. So I think that this is going to be a tough sell to any objective and fair jury that wants the state to actually prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Something that we talked about on our live stream not too long ago, Robert Price was saying, it's not a crime to burn my phones, I'm just, and it sounds bizarre, but just considering other cases that we've seen where defendants are convicted of lesser charges, manslaughter, things like this, all of the evidence of after the fact, whether it be evidence of concealing the body or otherwise, I guess, what's your message to the public that might think that this is like an open and shut case? He looks guilty. He's doing guilty mind things.
We talk about the guilty mind as criminal defense attorneys, and it's important to realize that just because somebody has a guilty mind, you don't know exactly what is the source of their guilt. If Brad Simpson's upset that he had a fight with his wife that got physical, if he's afraid that law enforcement is already targeting him, and he's afraid that people are going to go through his phone and say, check his browser history or be tailing him to arrest him, that could explain all of these behaviors. And all of those explanations don't rely on him having killed his wife. There's a lot of reasons that people might feel guilty other than a specific criminal charge. And it appears that these guys did have a tough marriage. Anybody knows when they're going through a hard spot in their marriage, there's a lot of things to feel guilty about. And lots of people turn off their phones and their location software when they're mad at their spouse, and they just don't want to communicate. So the problem that law enforcement is going to have in this case is that they've got some circumstantial evidence that makes him look like he's guilty about something, but there's lots of potential explanations for why he might have that guilty mind, other than the crimes for which he's been charged.
As you know, as a resident of the Alamo Heights area and you know, you're part of that community, talk to me a little bit about, I mean, just to us, the layman, it comes off as very callous that perhaps he could have been transporting his wife's body with his kid in the car, taking his kid to school, and then having Suzanne in the truck bed. If that comes out to be the case, do you think that, you know, have you seen a level of callousness in cases like this?
You know, when we do see spousal murders, there tends to be what appears to be callousness in terms of people lying to the kids or performing actions to cover up around the kids. You have to realize that when we have murders within a family, contact with family, including kids, is generally a necessity. It is an act of desperation, not necessarily callousness. It's because under the extreme circumstances, that person may not have a choice. However, that doesn't mean it won't be traumatic for a child who realizes that she rode around in a truck with her mother's body, if that's what happened. So I think that this is something where people don't empathize with the individual who's in crisis, but at the same time, it is fair to recognize what kind of trauma may have been caused to another victim.
Just any thoughts on this generally? Just the state's approach or even the defense's approach so far. It appears that the two other charges for family violence and unlawful restraint were rejected as extraneous offenses. So I would assume that's because they filed the murder charge.
I think the misdemeanors were filed as placeholders. Right off the bat, I think that there's problems with both of those cases. They are reliant on hearsay. There's no direct evidence of that. A lot of that evidence may not be usable in court. A lot of it could be disbelieved by a jury if it was used in court. So those weren't good cases to begin with. The bonds, frankly, were unreasonable, but it's not unusual for the state to bring a very thin misdemeanor case in order to hold somebody while they're investigating a more significant crime. I've actually dealt with that before. But to be honest with you, I don't think that it is completely ethical to overcharge somebody. Well, to charge somebody with a crime that you really don't have evidence for, and then to request massive bonds that are disproportionate to those charges. I mean, if we're going to have the rule of law and a fair, objective investigation and due process, then you got to follow the rules. And this man has been demonized immediately and on an ongoing basis. And I think it's going to be very tough for him to get a fair trial at this point because of the way the DAs have fed into the negative publicity around him.
That's really it for me. Anything you'd like to add that I didn't ask?
I think when you read this affidavit, a lot of people are going to ask themselves, why didn't these people say anything? Because there's people who seem to have known that Brad Simpson may have been violent towards his wife well before the alleged murder. And I would just like to encourage people that if they do hear these types of things, that they should try to offer help and support, that they maybe should reach out to law enforcement. It's a scary thing to do because you don't want to make a violent situation worse. But we know that when we turn a blind eye to this kind of domestic violence, it is going to continue. So I think the message here for everyone is, if you hear something that makes you fear for somebody, do something.